every day. Time no day, so every day. If you see what happened today, Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Curatorial-ly Speaking. I am your host, Oluwasayo Olowo-Ake, and today I am joined by a very special guest, someone I'm excited to talk to, a TV and film producer, and recently her series How to Be a Person was nominated for a BAFTA. So I'm really excited. Her name is Tobi Kyeremateng. Hi, Tobi. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. So talk to me about like when you first got the news of this nomination, how did it make you feel?
Um, yeah, I didn't really believe it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like obviously the nominations came out and I just look through them every year just to see what shows have been nominated and stuff. And then it just like it was there and I was like, oh my God, this is like
Oh
a real
wow.
thing. And then I had to like go to work straight after. So I feel like this is the first day that I'm having time to like digest it and yeah, it's obviously amazing, but it's just
Yeah.
I don't think anyone expects that they're going to be nominated for something like that. It always feels quite far away. Um,
Yeah. Oh my
yeah.
gosh. That's a pretty big deal. That's a pretty big deal. Congratulations again. And tell me about how to be a person. What's it's a TV series and
Yeah, it's like a comedy drama online series, five short episodes that kind of explore different stories from the perspective of teenagers. I think all of the stories are real to an extent, and then we've obviously dramatized certain elements of it. Um, and yeah, they're kind of written and filmed in a sort of teenage diary-esque kind of style. So a lot of it is voiceover for one particular person with other people kind of intercepting. But yeah, it's every episode kind of has like a how-to title. So obviously the series is called How to Be a Person. Um, but then each episode will be like, how to do this or how to do that, that kind of
yeah.
look at different things that different young people might be going through. And I think the particular episode that got us the BAFTA nomination was an episode called How to Have an Abortion, which was based off the writer's real life. Is something that she experienced when she was really young, and she kind of wanted to show actually how much support she had from her dad in particular, as someone that is from a Muslim background as well. So yeah, it's kind of like something that you don't really hear a lot about, especially with abortions that are a very kind of taboo subject.
Yeah.
Politically as well, there's obviously a lot that's happened over the last year with laws and rights and politics. So it felt really important to actually share Cinder's story. But yeah, it's also like very funny. It's,
Yeah.
it's it's really lighthearted and funny, and that felt really crucial to the form of that particular series. We don't want it to be sort of like everyone is sad and like
Yeah.
ultimately these are like multifaceted teenagers that have lots of different emotions and are going through a range of things, and that's what we wanted to show.
That's amazing. And like just watching, excuse me, just watching like different clips and even just looking at your website, I kind of get that sense from your
Yeah.
that you are highlighting communities and people just going through life. As people figure out
Yeah.
life, you're kind of highlighting that, and that's amazing. And so, have you always are these the kind of stories that you've always wanted to tell, or were you interested in something else prior?
um I think these are the stories that I've always wanted to tell. I think the forms that I've used to tell them has changed over time. So film and TV I've been doing for consistently, I want to say, for about 4 years, maybe 5 years. But before that, I was more in the live space. So I did a lot of like theatre and live art and poetry. And so like I think it's always been the same. I guess the spine of my work is the same, which is that I just want to be able to really propel forward stories that we might not hear enough about in depth
Yeah.
and with quality as well. Um, but I think the form that I do that in changes, and I think that's still the same case with film and TV because I work across both scripted and
Mhm.
non-scripted. So I'll do a documentary, or I'll do like a drama, short film,
Yeah.
or I'll do a comedy series. So the forms are still shifting, but visual is sort of the medium um,
Hmm.
at the
Hmm.
moment.
Well, that's amazing though. That's really amazing. Whenever I see anything that centers community like that in that way, especially people who in the popular media maybe we will have to fight to see,
Mm,
kind of warms my heart and it like makes me happy that oh somebody is doing good work. That's how it makes me feel. But let me move on to your documentary, Oh I'm Bear.
hmm.
So I was researching for a curatorial proposal idea that I had, and I stumbled on your documentary. And when I watched it, it made me smile so wide because it just reminded me of home. Like I'm from Nigeria,
Hmm.
I'm Yoruba, and I really love parties. That's another thing. But you know, it's like your family and friends. That's where you meet them. That's where you bond. That's where you like. I
Mm.
don't know. You just grow closer. So I wanted to ask you why Owambe? Why this particular story?
Yeah. So the documentary came from an essay that I wrote during lockdown. So I was commissioned to write something as part of this wider publication called Black Joy. And it was just like a series of essays from Black writers and artists writing about specific topics. And I feel like it was probably the first time that I was asked to write about something and I could choose what that topic is.
Hmm.
I'm not like, I wouldn't call myself like a writer, but I think during lockdown, I was being commissioned to write a lot um, about very specific topics, and they kind of range. So some of it would be about like black radio in the UK, and then some of it would be about like colorism online. So they were all like really different. But this was the first time that someone was just like, write about whatever you want in response to Black Joy. Um, and so I was like, okay, like actually, I would really love to write about hall parties because I
Yeah.
think there's always a recurring conversation where people from my generation are kind of like, the hall parties are slowing down and I miss them and I maybe didn't appreciate them as much at the time and all of this kind of stuff. So I really wanted to kind of look into that. But I think it also gave me a chance to connect with my like my wider family, basically. And so my uncle, who we called the boss,
Yeah.
who's in the documentary as well. Like he is basically like the whole party veteran in the family. Like
Yeah.
he is the go-to person to throw parties, and he's thrown them everywhere and anywhere in the UK.
Yeah.
And so I started with him, um, and just like we just sat on the phone for a long time, and he was just like telling me all of these stories, and my mum was included in some of those stories, but obviously he's talking about her from a standpoint of before I was born.
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting to like build my mum's character before I existed and kind of look at her as a whole person in that regard.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I wrote this essay, and then this opportunity came up with the Netflix fund, and I was like, oh, it would be cool, like to visualize this in some way. Uh, but I wasn't planning on directing it at first. I wanted to produce it and get like
Yeah.
an actual director to direct it. And then it just didn't turn out that way, so I ended up directing it. But yeah, that's kind of how it happened.
Wow. There's always that one relative, there's always that one uncle or auntie or someone in the family that like is the person that is like that knows, right?
Yeah,
But
that's my
also
uncle.
but like it really the video I mean the documentary came out amazing. It really did, you know.
Thank you.
And so I want to say you just talked a bit about it, but maybe even we can talk about more. Why was it important for you to
Mm.
include your personal archive in this or
Mm.
your family's personal archive in this story?
I think that was the only way it was going to happen, to be honest. Like, even in the making of the documentary, in a lot of documentaries, people include general archive, right? And usually this is archive that you can go into sort of like any archival space or like a website that holds like stock
Yeah.
images and stuff like that. There are no stock images of Nigerian hall parties in the UK. Like they
Wow.
don't exist. I was looking for them and I was like, there are no videos, there are no photos. which meant that even making the documentary, we had to literally go to people's houses and ask them to
Mm.
like dig in their attics or in their
Yeah.
basements and find photo albums and old videos that we then had to scan. And when you're scanning these videos, you're literally you have to sit through the whole thing in order for it to scan. So it's literally just sitting there. Like
Yeah.
I had an amazing archive producer called Tanya, and she went to all these people's houses and just scanned so many photos and videos and some of these things that people hadn't looked at in years. And so they were like talking to Tanya about
Mm.
these different parties and kind of what they meant. And I just
Yeah.
think it there was no other way. I think it had to start with the personal, because that was my personal
Mm.
experience of parties. And I think all of the work that I do starts with the personal, to be honest, and then you kind of like
Mm.
expand that and flesh it out based on some of the things that people say. So in the documentary we go to a white garment church, but that wasn't originally in the script or the plan that I wrote. It was only because we started
Mm.
interviewing more people and they started talking about the
Mm.
white garment church being so integral to the music that you would find in some of these parties. So we were like, okay, cool, we have to go to a white garment church, and
Yeah.
there's no other way to, you just
Yeah.
can't do that in any other way than talking to people,
Mm.
especially these elders that have incredible archives and just have albums and albums and albums of pictures and videos and everything. Like my
Yeah.
mum literally the other day sent a bunch of photos in our family WhatsApp group chat. And I was like, where are you getting these photos from? And she's just like, oh, I just found it in a box somewhere, like I was like, I've never
Yeah.
seen these before, but that's usually the case with our elders. Like they have all of
Mm.
the stuff and it kind of just sits and gathers dust. So it was really important to try and dig those up and share them and allow other people to then start conversations, hopefully with their elders about some of the things
Mm-hmm.
that they experience too.
Yeah, and the importance of that, like what it does for people who are viewers like myself, right? Watching this is, oh wow, like you kind of see yourself not just
Mm,
represented, but like these stories are so important. And like, you talk about this, I didn't find any stock images, right? I had to go by myself and go to different families, and because it's not like it's not there, it's there, it is there, like capital
mm,
letter there, like all caps lock, right?
exactly.
It's just
Yeah.
not seen, it's not accessible in the same way. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
still amazing that you did this documentary. But I want to now ask about spraying money.
Yes.
I know people have different conversations when it comes to this, but I love that quote that you put inside. I love that quote so much. Like you said, um, money started falling on our heads. We were thankful for abundance as the blessings on our crowns fall to our feet. Where did you
Mm.
find this beautiful quote, please?
So a lot of those quotes I just wrote myself, so they're made up.
Wow.
And it's like, but I feel like it's kind of a privilege with a lot of Nigerian proverbs. Like you can kind of write
Hmm.
anything and people will be like, yeah, that's a proverb. Like no one's going to question whether that's real or not. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, I literally just wrote that myself. So, so yeah, I wrote it myself, but it's like, I don't know, like spraying money. I think for me, when I was going to parties as a child or when I was younger, there was just something about the way that I viewed it at that time. Like from the
Hmm.
perspective of a child or a teenager, it is something that looks really majestic.
Yeah.
And just like abundant in a way, which I really wanted to capture. Obviously lots of people have different feelings about the spraying money, um but yeah, I think it felt it's a part of it ultimately, so it felt important to
Yeah.
to include it. But I wanted to sort of summarize every chapter with some kind of quote or something that kind of like really lent itself to what people were about to see.
And like it's true because when I saw that, I was like, yes, this is actually what growing up as a child, going to parties and my uncles are spraying me money. This is what this reminds me of. Like, it was like it's the motivation to dance, it's motivation
Yeah.
to go and like, you have money in your piggy bank, different things like that. But like, so like now the different conversations, I feel like sometimes I understand the different points, but I feel
Mm,
like sometimes we lose the essence of what that was and what that means for
yes.
each family, right? And each
100%. Yeah.
like, yeah. But okay, so let's go to community. You talked earlier a bit earlier about this, but like
Mhm.
um you went to the White Garment Church, like you said, you spoke
Mhm.
to Yinka Odukoya, founder of Faji
Mhm.
Sundays, BC Akins, different. Would you say that, or me, let me just say, I'm assuming that your community is not only within reach and accessible, but that there's like a wealth of knowledge to draw from. But you were talking earlier, so maybe you can talk more about this. Did you have to go and dig? Was it hard to find people and things, or was it
Mm.
just all of them just really close?
It actually wasn't as hard as I thought it would be.
Mm.
And I think, yeah, that is because there is a wealth of knowledge in the communities that I sit in. I think it would have it would have maybe been more difficult if it was a longer documentary and I was going to other cities. Like
Yeah,
everyone that I spoke to ultimately grew up in London, and
okay.
London, a lot of things happen in London, and
Yeah.
it's probably harder to find like a tight knit Nigerian community um somewhere else in, I don't know, Sheffield or just somewhere else in the UK. I think the hardest person to find was someone that wasn't from like a dominant Nigerian tribe. Like I really wanted to highlight
Hmm.
lots like at least like one person that isn't Yoruba or Igbo.
Yeah.
Like it was like I
Yeah.
can't just have everyone be from the two, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was probably the hardest person to find, because actually when I look at
Mm.
my friends, a lot of them are Yoruba or Igbo.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, otherwise I think the word kind of like spreads. So I would kind of like go to David, who was also in the documentary, and then he would be like, "Oh, I know Solek and Mr. Logo. Let
Yeah.
me message them." So
Mm-hmm.
it was good actually. Like there was a lot of help
Wow.
trying to find people.
Wow. That's amazing. So it's like again, what this is like the definition of collaboration with your community. Like all
Mm,
over this is written all over this documentary, and it's so important, and I think great to see that you had that support, and like your community was there right by your side,
right.
helping you find other people as well, right? But then Yinka Odukoya mentioned something about the disconnect with the older and younger generation. Can you talk
Mm.
to me a bit more of what that looks like in your context?
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I think it's situational. I think, and I guess it also depends on the kind of conversations we're trying to have with our elders. But I think
Mm-hmm.
there are some elders that probably don't talk about them first coming to London from Nigeria and
Mm-hmm.
what that was like for them. Like I imagine there's a lot of things that they went through um
Yeah.
that they maybe don't feel comfortable talking about, or have kind of had to put to the back of their minds because they have children and a family to think
Mm-hmm.
about, and they don't have time to think about all these things.
Yeah.
um and I think with this generation, obviously you have people like Yinka, who are really moving the culture forward and still trying to like keep it alive.
Yeah.
But we're also living in a different context, and I think the whole parties that were happening when our elders were throwing them were very much community centered. You had a couple of
Hmm.
aunties that were making the food. One
Yeah.
uncle would bring all the drink. Like there would be a
Yeah.
committee that would dress the hall or whatever. It was a real
Mm-hmm.
effort amongst everyone. And I think the times that we're living in at the moment, I don't know if people have the capacity or the will to,
Yeah.
you know, do what they're doing and then be like, okay, now I'm gonna cook jollof rice for 100 people. Like,
Yeah.
so I think there are disconnects in that sense. And I think when I was talking to my uncle and my mum, there were lots of things that I learned about them from this process, but I also wondered, if not for this process, would there be any other context where I would have known this information?
Hmm.
Because it seemed like it was things that they were happy to talk about, but it's only
Yeah.
because I asked. um
Hmm.
and I don't know how many people are asking um
Yeah.
their elders about these stories, and it made me want to ask more. And so I think from them, I've just been like asking my parents really random questions,
Yeah.
just to learn more about who they were as people beyond just
Wow.
being my parent. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think that's sort of the disconnect at the moment.
Hmm. That makes sense. Because to me, I grew up in Nigeria, but now I moved. I'm now in Canada, right? And so,
Mm,
um, I I'm like, oh, I grew up experiencing these parties, and I grew up seeing my parents and other family members organize these things and get someone to cook and different things like that. But now
mm,
I just feel this distance because I am not
mm,
in Nigeria, and it's different in different places. So, in a place like England or like let's say London that has this very big community of like Yoruba
mm,
people or like Nigerians, I can see how there is even space for these parties to continue. But it's
mm.
interesting now to just hear about that kind of disconnect that I actually didn't know existed. So, yeah, okay. And then, so that in that when I watched the different chapters and I was like the fall, I was like, no, no, don't let there be a fall, no. Just and then you go to rebirth and I see this proverb again. Maybe you tell me if this is you or if this is an African proverb, but you say the sun does not forget a village just because it is small. It will return at dawn. It's so beautiful, but okay, is it you? Is it an African proverb?
I oh I think it's real. I think
Mhm.
it was, it's not an exact quote, so I think there was a quote that I liked, and
Mhm.
then I sent it to the poet that kind of narrates at the beginning, called Inua Elums.
Yeah.
I just sent it to him and I was like, "Can you write something like this?"
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of what it ended up being. So it's
Mm.
half real.
Yeah, okay, okay. But still, it's a very beautiful quote, and I think it summarizes that, like what you are moving towards, and I guess what
Mm,
Faji Sundays kind of does,
mm,
keeping the keeping Owambe alive, keeping all parties alive, keeping the community like thinking about this. But I want to ask you, and this is kind of like my last question for you.
mm,
What do you hope for your community to get from your work? Now, not just talking about this documentary. I'm talking about just your
mm.
work in general. What do you hope for your community?
Well, it's a big question.
Yeah.
um, I think it's a multitude of things. I think I want people to watch my work and kind of see elements of their experiences that they maybe felt they didn't have the language to articulate.
Hmm.
Um, and then they watch something and they're like, "Oh yeah, this is it," and it gives them a language.
Yeah.
Um, in some instances, there's definitely a sense of pride, and a sense of joy, um,
Yeah.
and a sense of just being a part of something that is probably bigger than how we feel. Um,
Hmm.
but also just to like take stock as well. I
Yeah.
think what I really love about film or any kind of art form, film, theatre, visual arts, whatever it is that you have to take time to digest them.
Yeah.
Um, you have to make the choice to stop whatever it is that you're doing in your day to focus on this one thing.
Hmm.
Um, and so you hope that that one thing is nourishing in some regard. And I don't think that always has to be um super political or super like heartfelt. I think it can also just be funny, and it can
Yeah.
also just be entertaining as well. Like
Hmm.
all of this work is still entertainment, even if it
Hmm.
has nuance and deeper contexts.
Yeah.
And so I really want people to be able to feel nourished in some regard after they've watched a bit of my work. That's what I hope. I don't
Yeah.
I doubt that that's achieved all the time, but that's the aim.
I can say that as a viewer, I definitely felt nourished looking at your work. I'm just like I need to watch that video again and again and again. Just seeing it makes me very happy. So you have one
Thank you.
testimonial. Well, thank you so much, Toby.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for talking to me. Thank you for making out time. And like congratulations again. And for everyone, just in the description box, just like look at Tobi's bio, and I'll put a link to her website so you can go and see her amazing work, please. It's not just ordinary anymore. We're talking BAFTA nominated. That's what we're talking. Okay? Everyone go and see her work. But Toby, thank you so much. And until next time, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Them no say we day, we come night and day. Sister pave the way, so I no hesitate. Brother tell me say, make I no come exclaim. Cause this gist the day, yes this gist the day.